Hello, hello everyone. We're going to do our delivery lecture today, and I'm just going to kind of incorporate some stuff from our language chapter within our delivery lecture today, both pulling from our text, adding my own stuff to delivery, and this is my favorite lecture of the semester, so I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I do. We'll have some fun videos and things to kind of kick us up. So here is one from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Enjoy.
Here. Adam Lee.
Here.
Adamowski. Adamson.
Here.
Adler.
Here.
Anderson.
Here.
Bueller. 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 Bueller.
He's sick. My best friend's sister's boyfriend's brother's girlfriend heard from this guy who knows this kid is going with the girl who saw Ferris pass out at 31 Flavors last night. I guess it's pretty serious.
Thank you, Sir Norman.
No problem whatsoever.
Fry.
Okay guys, so I show you that clip, that monotone speaker, that monotone presenter, and how bored the audience is and no one's paying attention, no one's listening to his message. He has a very blah facial expression, all the things that we know we shouldn't do as good, engaging public speakers. So hopefully by the end of this lecture today, you'll have some more tools in your delivery tool belt to keep your audience engaged and really taking in your message. So the first thing I want to talk about today is a theory that applies very well to public speaking, and it's called the nonverbal expectancy theory. So we're talking about this overall question of why is delivery important. So the first thing is listeners expect effective delivery. So if you are in a public speaking situation, they are expecting you to handle it well and professionally, right? So obviously going into a wedding toast, they're going to expect something very different than a political debate. But they have this reference point, this frame in their mind, knowing what to expect from you. So now, after this class, hopefully you'll have those tools to kind of orient yourself and analyze your audience in those various situations. So this theory is kind of talking about that. So people have certain expectations for speakers. If those expectations are violated, listeners will feel less favorable toward the communicator. So now I'll show you an example of this.
Judge number 3, Nene Leaks, your question please.
A recent report shows that in 40% of American families with children, women are the primary earners, yet they continue to earn less than men. What does this say about society?
I think we can relate this back to education and how we are continuing to try to strive to figure out how to create jobs right now. That is the biggest problem, and I think especially the men are seen as the leaders of this, and so we need to try to figure out how to create education better so that we can solve this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Utah. Thank you, sweetheart. All right, next let's have...
Okay, so there we saw that this candidate for Miss USA did not handle the questions in the polished manner that we would expect. We kind of expect that world peace, very routine answer with just variations for their respective platforms, right? And she was just blown away by the question, lost her train of thought, something. And that made her expectation, she violated that in a negative manner and dropped down. They feel less favorable toward the communicator if their expectations are not met. This can also happen positively, though I think it probably happens positively less often, but here's an example of a positive take on nonverbal expectancy theory.
Baby, lock the door and turn the lights down low. Put some music on, it's all slow. Baby, we ain't got no place to go. I hope you understand. I've been thinking about this all day long. I never fail to feel quiet. strong. I can't believe how much it turns me on just to be your man. Go ahead, boy. You can't believe it.
Okay, so if you were to do a informal analysis going into hearing the type of music, that country genre coming up on stage, and then seeing that singer, would you expect that to come out of his mouth? No, but it was awesome. It's so good, right? So we violated our expectations in a great way. He really blew us away with what he sang and performed there. So again, nonverbal expectancy theory, usually a negative connotation. If expectations are violated, listeners feel less favorable toward the communicator, but that can work vice versa, where someone really surprises you and you feel much more positively about the communicator and the public speaking situation. Okay, number 2, why is delivery important? Listeners make emotional connections with you through delivery. So again, if you're watching that Ferris Bueller clip, you're going to be, if you were to watch 5 minutes of that, right? You catch his emotion and his bored sense, okay? You can also do that, again, positively. And here is a really funny example illustrating emotional contagion theory. The emotions we have are contagious, and people tend to catch the emotions of others.
Daddy's gonna make him laugh now. Ready? Come on. Do it again.
That clip was on America's Funniest Home Videos, and I probably let it go on a little bit too long, but I absolutely love watching that clip. It always makes me smile, and I hope it made you guys smile too. You're catching the emotions of the very, very happy babies feeding off of each other and each of their emotions. So that is emotional contagion theory. We'll move right along here into reason number 3 for why delivery is important, is listeners believe what they see. So we tend to believe nonverbal messages more than verbal ones because they are harder to fake. For instance, I have this cookie jar here. When I was little, we had a cookie jar in our kitchen, and my dad was the cook, and my dad had just made chocolate chip cookies, and I remember this specifically, and he said, you cannot have a cookie until we have dinner. And then he went and did something else, and obviously 7-year-old me went and got a cookie out of the cookie jar and ate it as fast as I possibly could, right? When he came back, he said, did you have a cookie? And I said, I didn't have a cookie, but there was chocolate all over my face and all over my hands. So my nonverbal message, and I'm a terrible liar, so he obviously picked up on those cues from my verbal message, and then my nonverbals really hit it home that I was lying, right? So we tend to believe nonverbal messages more than verbal ones. You can tell, for instance, if someone is having a very down day, and you ask them, are you okay? And they say, yeah, I'm fine. You can tell by that facial expression and that persona that they're putting off that they're having a bad day, right? So that just all ties into listeners believe what they see. We tend to believe nonverbal messages more than verbal ones. So thinking about that as you are presenting as well. Okay, so now we are going to move into the methods of delivery, and there are 4 main methods of delivery. I really want to hit home that all of these are used and they all have a place in the public speaking setting. They are specific really to certain instances where they work best. So the first one we're going to talk about is manuscript speaking, and that is reading a speech from written text. So you are literally reading from a delivery outline, a preparation outline, a story, something like that. Advantages, you can choose your words carefully, so everything is very planned out, word for word, you're reading it right there. Disadvantages, this is rarely done well enough to maintain interest. So if we think about certain examples from manuscript, this might be something like a eulogy. It's like the Daily News where people are directly reading off of a prompter. Politics a lot of times is a manuscript speaking, again, because you really have to choose your words carefully and nothing is left up to chance here. If you think about the news, we only see about 30 seconds a minute, maybe 2 minutes of news at one time before we're breaking for commercial or something else popping in. And I think that's really an effort to maintain our interest here, because the disadvantage is it's rarely done well enough to maintain interest. The second type we have is memorized speaking. So this is delivering a speech word for word from memory without notes. And if we think about this, guys, I have this over here. We have 2 addresses memorized, our own and the address from Nemo, right? P. Sherman 42 Wallaby Way, Sydney. We have that memorized, and I think when we memorize speeches, we do it in the same way. We're in a rhythm, okay? It's like saying your ABCs. And if you get off track, then you're lost. You have to start over at the beginning, right? So advantages here, you don't have notes, so you have full eye contact. You're never losing eye contact with your audience, which is great. Use of gestures, you have nothing in your hands, nothing inhibiting you, it's just you and your voice. Disadvantages, again, going back to that ABCs example, you can lose your spot. It's very easy to forget, and you might sound like a machine gun, very mechanical, because all of us, or most of us, memorize in a rhythm. So there is a time and place for this, direct eye contact, use of gestures, all those things. Okay. The next type we're going to talk about is impromptu speaking, and this is giving a speech without advanced preparation, which for some of us is very, very nerve-wracking, okay? So this is, you can speak freely. Again, you're maintaining eye contact. You've had no time to prepare those notes. You've had no time to memorize anything. The disadvantage here is you may lack organization of your thoughts. However, after taking this class and learning several organizational patterns and some tips and tricks to public speaking, hopefully you can very quickly, to some extent, come up with some sense of organization, whether that's just thinking of buzzwords and things you want to be sure you hit on and previewing them, working through them, and concluding. Guidelines when giving an impromptu speech. You always want to consider your audience, so that should be the first thing that pops into your head in any impromptu speaking situation. You need to always be brief, try and organize. Again, I strongly encourage those buzzwords. Speak honestly but with reserve. So again, knowing your limits, considering your audience, and being cautious, especially with controversial topics there. You haven't had time to really think through your message and any hiccups that you could encounter. So impromptu can be really fun. Impromptu is also a little bit scary for some people, and for obvious reasons. But always considering your audience as the forefront, and then trying to think of some semblance of organization, keeping your message brief with impromptu. And then, ta-da, we have extemporaneous speaking, and this is what we focus on in our class. So that's speaking from a written or memorized speech without having memorized the exact wording of the speech. So that's a balance, right? It's a balance between having planned out your speech word for word in your outline, practicing with delivery notes that are the shortened version of your outline, and then being able to kind of piecemeal things together based on your audience's reaction. So if someone's looking very confused when you're giving an informative speech, you might back up, maybe make things simpler, rephrase something, and that's okay in extemporaneous speaking. Maybe people are loving your story, so you add in another little tidbit to your story, just making sure you've given yourself some wiggle room in your time frame, right? So advantage is you sound more conversational, again, because you're not memorized, you're not reading, but you have a basic format figured out, and you've read through your outline several times. You've prepared enough that that's going to flow naturally, yet with still some conversational feel. You're organized and interesting, so you've taken the time to organize your message. You've taken the time to add in those extra tidbits, that 70% of positioning for that 30% of research to really hit home with your audience. You've tailored your message to your specific audience. The disadvantages, which we know, is it takes time to prepare it, and it takes skill to deliver well. So that's what we're working on in this class. We are working on getting better at being extemporaneous speakers. Okay, the next thing we're going to work into is 6 categories of nonverbal communication. The first of which is eye contact. And eye contact is kind of tricky, especially in our online setting when you're making eye contact basically with a camera, other people on the other end of the camera, but it's very different than if you were sitting in a classroom and actually physically being with other humans, right? But eye contact lets the audience know that you are talking to them and helps them to maintain interest. Establish eye contact with the entire audience. So I'll give you examples when I teach public speaking in class. Usually the first 2 speeches I usually sit in the middle of the class, in the back of the class, so middle back, and pretty much everyone has tunnel vision right at me. So we start to work on in the class maintaining eye contact with everyone. So you're surveying the back of the room, you're surveying the front of the room, left to right, everyone in between, right? So you want to try and make eye contact with every single person in your audience at some point. If you're struggling, you're seeking out those very positive people in the audience that are making eye contact with you, smiling, nodding, those kinds of things. So you're seeking out favorable people in the audience there too. If someone is not paying attention to you, not looking at you, maybe that's when you walk closer to them and you're making more eye contact with them. So obviously this is in the public speaking in person kind of setting that you can do this. But using eye contact to, again, get them talking or have them looking at you when you're talking, you're making them maintain interest with you. So using eye contact to your advantage there. Our eyes can convey a lot of meaning. So this is from a published study, and these are pictures that the author analyzed for the study and asked people to choose which of these adjectives describe these people based on their eyes. And I find this somewhat hard to believe, but it's fun to think about. That this person appears bored is what they came to. This person, it's the last word for all of them. So this person looks convinced. This one looks terrified, which I think is the hardest one to believe. Oops. And this one looks concerned. So our eyes convey a lot of meaning. Even just in one little glance at someone, you can say a lot. Okay, so 6 categories of nonverbal communication. Continuing on, the second is gestures. So you can really add a lot to a speech if gestures are done correctly, and you can really distract from a speech if they're not. Some things that I see is people use the same gesture over and over and over again, or they feel like they have to have a gesture for every single point they make. That's false. Gestures should be used to really complement, enhance your message. And you'll see these words kind of here for the functions of gestures. So a repeating gesture, an example of a repeating gesture is if I say, let's talk about main point number 1. And I would give you main point number 1 while holding up main point number 1. Or step number 2. So I'm repeating what I'm saying with my gesture. Contradicting would be like me saying yes while shaking my head no. So saying yes and shaking my head no, which is kind of even hard to do. So that is a contradicting gesture. Your nonverbal is contradicting with your verbal. A substituting gesture would be something like a little kid is pulling on your arm and you say 1 second to them while you're talking to someone else. So you're using your finger to say 1 second to the little kid, finishing your conversation with the adult in front of you. So substituting that with a gesture. A complimenting gesture would be like, great job, okay? And that's kind of the hazy point here between complimenting and repeating. Okay, so I would say repeating is more of an exact repetition. I'm saying 1, I have 1 up. Complimenting is like, great job, I know this means great job, and I'm saying that at the same time. Emphasizing can be like when someone slams their fist on a table and they're angry and they're trying to make a point. And a regulating gesture would be like someone checking their watch to tell you that they are late and they need to go, so they're just hinting at that with their gesture. These are bad gesture examples. So parade rest is when you're standing like this guy over here. The broken wing is standing like this. You can have 1 wing up or both wings up. The arm clutch, so you're holding your arms like this. It can be 1 arm or the other or both. Hands in pockets, that's usually a guy thing. Try and keep your hands out of your pockets. And this is the oddball, the fig leaf clutch, which is just holding your hands in front of your body. So trying to avoid those gestures. Using gestures effectively, so you want to be very natural with your gestures, yet you want to be definite, so they have a purpose with your message. Use gestures that are consistent with your message, so try and avoid those contradictory gestures. You want to vary your gestures, again, not overdoing it, coordinating them with what you say, and then making your gestures appropriate, obviously. The third is movement, and movement we know is very difficult online. I challenge you to even shift to deliver what main point 1 on one side of your screen, main point 2 on the other, backing up for main point 3, maybe creating some immediacy, getting really close to your screen, all those kinds of things. And we're trying to even stand up so that we can have some distance and move around and do even more with that. So make sure your movement is purposeful and not distracting. So things I see online are swiveling in your chair while you're presenting, rocking back and forth, those kinds of things. So we're using movement to our advantage. Okay, posture. So posture communicates the intensity of the emotion you are trying to portray. Your posture should reflect your interest in speaking and your attention to the audience. That's the typo there, your attention to the audience. So if you see a speaker that's really slumped over in front of you, again, emotional contagion theory, right? I'm going to pick up on that, and maybe all of our audience just lets out their air and they are very slumped over. If you are very tall and upbeat, professional, maybe they're going to pick up on that and engage with you and sit up taller in their seats. So using your posture to really portray your message and to emphasize the formality of the public speaking situation. Next is facial expression. So your audience sees your face before you start speaking. You can set the tone for your speech with facial expressions. Okay, so, and that's kind of an odd one, right? When I say vary your facial expressions, you're like, oh, that's so hard for me to do, right? Even something like raising your eyebrows just a little bit, smiling every once in a while, shaking your head, smirking, all those kinds of things will really help with facial expressions, so you're not just one blank face talking and presenting your message. Even if you have a very varied vocal delivery and a very blank face, you need to couple those together, right, and show energy with your face. And again, just a quick eyebrow lift, I know that sounds silly, kind of helps sometimes, I really found. Personal appearance, consider what the audience expects for your personal appearance. So it might be a business professional, business casual. We are just trying to look very professional and presentable in the online format, right? So always knowing what is expected of you for attire, tying back to nonverbal expectancy theory. We never want to give them a reason to discredit us or look down upon us less favorably. All right, let's talk about vocal delivery. So speak to be understood. You want a correct volume. So I always have people say, as a strength, I'm really loud at the beginning of public speaking. Well, that's great, but use that to your advantage. Sometimes there might be a part of a message where you need to speak a little bit softer. And there might be other times where you're getting very excited or really making a point and you start to speak louder. So using volume to help you with your message there. Articulation, and these three are kind of hard to tell the difference between articulation, dialect, and pronunciation. So articulation is clear and distinct sounds, and then we'll look at some videos for dialect and pronunciation here.
Now I thought I'd share some of my favorite misheard lyrics tweets from you guys. Here we go. First one is from @Iodes. He says, I want to rock and roll all night and part of every day. Part of, very specific, between 11 and 3.
I will rock.
I will rock and roll.
All night, look out.
Just a little bit.
Because the lid is off the rock.
Yeah,
but during the day.
This one's from @Kimberly's21. She says, when I was little, I thought the song was Bob, 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 or Ann. My parents' names are Bob and Ann. It's like, Mom and Dad, you're famous. You're in a song. This one's from @NancyV.Rom. She says, I used to sing, who you gonna call? Those bastards! Instead of Ghostbusters. It's a famous movie.
Yeah, famous movie.
I ain't afraid of no bastard.
I'm illegitimate.
This one is from @OTG2014. She says, I heard If You Start Me Up by the Rolling Stones as in Yugoslavia, you'll never stop. In Yugoslavia, you'll never stop. Never stop. You'll never stop. Yeah. you'll never stop. Girl, you never eat your.
Alright, so that is just a fun video and a fun way to think about articulation, dialect, and pronunciation. A good example of dialect is thinking about the difference between down south and a South African accent, right? So listening and knowing that if you have an accent, being able to slow down or really enunciate clearly, those kinds of things. So dialect can hinder a message. It can also really help a message and be very engaging if the accent really appeals to your audience. Pronunciation, where I see this most, is people trying to sound out authors' names or something when you're citing, and my advice to you there is fake it till you make it. Say it as best you can, act like you're saying it like you've been saying it since you were 3, and move right along. So just faking authors' names there with pronunciation. Another quick thing I wanted to point out with movement outside of our public speaking class online. Movement, when I tell people to move in the classroom setting, sometimes turns into pacing, where people are just walking from one side of the room to the other and back again, and really trying to avoid that if you are presenting online, otherwise, or presenting in person, because otherwise people are just doing this, watching you walk back and forth and not really taking in your message. So we see less of that online, obviously, but be cautious of that moving forward to any public speaking situations in person. Alright, we also want to speak with variety, so pitch, inflection, rates, and pauses there. And we'll watch a quick video to end our session with motivational movie clips. And I want you guys to really think about how pitch, inflection, rate, and pauses influence that video and the message and hitting points home there in that video. I think a lot of times, especially with pauses here, people are scared to pause, and I think that pauses are very effective, especially if you're letting a statistic sink in or transitioning. So don't be afraid of pauses. Pauses also help with rate. So if you are one that speaks too fast, maybe you're writing on your delivery notes that I need to take a breath and pause, and that's perfectly fine. A lot of the times your audience won't even notice. You can build them in strategically as well. Okay guys, some final tips for rehearsing your speech. So I strongly suggest rehearsing your speech standing up, naturally using the gestures that you use, noticing them, and then maybe even adding in some more strategic gestures to emphasize your message. You can video yourself to see these, your movements, your facial expressions, again, your gestures, practicing in front of someone else, and you really want to be sure to rehearse with all of your presentation aids so that you know when everything fits in, when you need to change slides, all those kinds of things. I also suggest practicing in front of a mirror too. That's a good way to do it if you're just by yourself and need some extra little practice there. Also, some things about language, guys. So when you're thinking about how you are going to couple delivery and language to really make something your own, I told you several stories in this lecture, and I used several videos to make a point. Bringing all of those things together, coupled with stuff from our lecture, that is what really makes a message clear, and hopefully it did that for you today. Seeing other examples, hearing other examples, putting the content into perspective, into real life stuff. So do that in your speeches, building in that 70% to supplement that 30% of new information. So you have power with your language. Yes, you are communicating, but you are using that planned language with extemporaneous speaking to really enhance your message and make a point. You're supposed to use simple language, so choosing the shorter word, being very concise, thinking about reading. If the audience is reading a message, they can go back and reread. If they are listening to a message, it's one and done. They're hearing the message one time. So you're building in that redundancy. You're keeping things really concrete and precise, using metaphors and similes, building in parallel structure, even if it's as simple as first we're going to talk about, second we're going to talk about, third we're going to talk about, repeating certain phrases, buzzwords, things like Martin Luther King's "I have a dream" that's said so many times over and over and really just hits the message home. You're using language that's important and accurate in all of the cultural settings, and analyzing your audience when choosing your language, those kinds of things. You want to avoid those cliches, yet you're building in some humor sometimes with cliches. So again, just always going back to analyzing your audience and what way can you position your message and your content to hit home with your audience best. Okay. I'm very excited to see you guys take this delivery lecture and put it into practice with your own messages. Email me with any questions, and I'm also happy to meet you in Zoom to do any delivery kind of workshops individually as well. See you soon.
Will you fight? No! We will run! And we will live.
Shame on you. This could be the greatest night of our lives. But you're gonna let it be the worst.
And I guarantee a week won't go by in your life you won't regret walking out, letting them get the best of you.
Well, I'm not going home.
We've got too far!
And I'm gonna stay right here and fight for this lost cause.
A day may come when the courage of men fails, but it is not this day.
The line must be drawn here. This far, no farther.
I'm not saying it's gonna be easy.
You're gonna work harder than you ever worked before.
But that's fine, we'll just get tougher with it.
If a person grits his teeth and shows real determination,
Failure is not an option.
That's how winning is done.
Believe me when I say
We can break this army here.
And win just one for the Gibbler.
But I say to you, what every warrior has known since the beginning of time, you've got to get mad.
I mean plumb mad dog mean.
If you would be free men, then you must
fight to fulfill that promise. Let us
Cut out their living guts.
1 inch at a time.
and they will know what we can do!
Let no man forget how menacing we are. We are lions.
You're like a big bear, man.
This is your time.
Seize the day.
Never surrender. Victory or death.
That's the Chicago.
Who's with me?
Clap! Clap, Velveteen guy! Clap!
All right, let's fly. And gentlemen in England, now a bed. Shall
No, my name is the Lord. When I tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our Independence Day.